Your Holiness and ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our continuance of the discussion we started this morning. Although we're going to continue with a slightly different accent and focus, this morning we heard about the larger philosophical world in which practice occurs and what the implications are in an interface with science for forming a community of practice in contemplative neuroscience, particularly. We're now going to get hello. Yes, we're now going to get very concrete and look at a case in point of how you actually do this. How can you operationalize this? What kinds of hypotheses can you generate? What issues, methodological issues, do you face when meditation comes into the laboratory? So let me quickly introduce the panel. To my far right is Rajesh Kasturagnan, who heads the Cognitive Science Program at the National Institute of Advanced Studies at Bangalore. I met Rajesh when he was at MIT, having finished his PhD there in cognitive science. And I believe, Your Holiness, that you've met everyone else on the panel. Matthew Ricard, you know well. He translates for you in France. And for those of you who have not met Matthew, he's a monk at the Sechin Monastery in Kathmandu and also holds a PhD in cellular genetics from the Pasteur Institute. Richie Davidson was in our morning panel. Dr. Wolf Singer is the director of the Max Planck Institute for Brain Research in Frankfurt and founding director of the Frankfurt Institute for Advanced Studies and Ernst Strungman Institute for Brain Research. John Dunn teaches in the Department of Religion at Emory University, is co-director of the Encyclopedia of Contemplative Practices and the Emory Collaborative for Contemplative Studies, and has his PhD in the study of religion from Harvard. And we're going to start with Richie. I should tell you a story. Richie and I were graduate students together at Harvard. And Richie it was clear back then that he was going to have a brilliant career. He did his PhD research and finished writing it up in 6 weeks flat. Just to give you a normative comparison, it took me a year and a half to do the same thing. So Richie has made a great contribution in founding affective neuroscience and now going on to develop the field of contemplative neuroscience. My contribution to science was to become a journalist. So let's start with Richie.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Holiness. Wonderful to be with you again, and you're such an inspiration. We're so grateful. Quite a few years ago, Your Holiness, you challenged us, and you said to us that we have used the tools of modern neuroscience to study qualities like fear and anxiety and depression, and you challenged us to apply those tools to the study of positive human qualities like kindness and compassion, equanimity. And what I'd like to do in the brief time I have this afternoon, for the sake of our panelists and also for our Indian brothers and sisters, to give a summary of what we have learned in some of the key areas in this research program that was directly stimulated by my first interaction with you in 1992. And the work really began in about 1999 or 2000, and it's just been accelerating since. And so I'd like to talk about 4 topics today. The first topic will be studies of compassion. Whoops, we can have the studies of compassion on the brain. And here we have taken advantage of the benefit of long-term practitioners that we bring to Madison to learn what we can about what's going on in the brain during the generation of compassion. The second
It's not on the slideshow.
to get the,
Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
You can hit F5.
No, that's okay.
So the second topic will be probing the nature of awareness during open presence. These are some very new findings from long-term practitioners. The third topic is really honoring the work that Francisco Varela began, and that is neurophenomenology, but neurophenomenology here with expert practitioners who are familiar with their minds in a way which we think is beneficial from a neuroscientific perspective to show what we can learn. And finally, the last topic will be on mindfulness and attention. So we'll see how much I can get through. So the first is on compassion. And here we have done a very, very simple kind of experiment with long-term practitioners where they come into the laboratory and we have them just alternate between a neutral state and a state in which compassion is generated. And I'll say a little bit more about the specific nature of the compassion practice in just a moment. But one of the important qualities of working with experts is that they can produce the practice and the state in very short periods of time. And so this is beneficial from a scientific perspective because we can contrast the neutral state and the meditation state. Now we also, as I'll show in a moment, we can evaluate what is happening when a practitioner generates compassion by challenging the mind with certain kinds of external stimuli that we present during the meditation state. And here, what we're particularly interested in is we present sounds of human suffering. For example, crying, a woman screaming. So these are sounds that challenge the mind and the brain and enable us to see how a mind which is infused with compassion responds differently from those stimuli compared to when we're in a neutral state. And it's kind of like a cardiologist who is interested in measuring the heart will sometimes have you exercise on a treadmill to challenge the heart. And what we're doing is challenging the mind in a certain kind of way. So in the words of Matthew here, and I'm sure he'll mention this in his presentation, he said, what we have tried to do for the sake of the experiment is to generate a state in which love and compassion permeate the whole mind with no other consideration, reasoning, or discursive thoughts. And so our first study, which was authored by Antoine Lutz as first author. You've met Antoine. Antoine was Francisco's last graduate student who is now in our lab in Madison. And this is from a paper that was published in 2004. And what it shows in this figure is a transition from the resting state to a state of meditation. And it's usually the case that in the analysis of brain activity, we need sophisticated computer techniques to extract signals. And here we can visibly see a difference between the resting state and the meditation state, where there is a presence of high amplitude oscillations in a particular frequency range called gamma, which is a fast frequency that has been implicated in binding percepts together, binding different elements of a perception together. And this is some seminal So by binding, what we mean is that often... Binding. So often an experience involves visual perception, sounds, auditory perception. If we're eating, it may involve taste. And all of these different elements come together in our experience. The coming together of these elements is referred to as binding, where these different elements are integrated. And one hypothesis about the significance of gamma activity, and particularly the synchronized gamma activity across different regions of the brain, is that it plays a role in bringing these different elements together. So this is Mathieu after he came out of the scanner. I showed this picture the other day. He's been in the scanner many, many times. And we have used the scanner to tell us what circuits may be affected by compassion meditation practice. And here there is a diagram of the brain, and the area that's circled is an area that is called the insula. And the insula is a very interesting part of the brain because it's the only part of the brain that actually has a map of the different visceral organs of the body. And it is a system in the brain through which interaction with the body appears to occur. And what we see in response to the negative sounds that we present to the practitioners is that the activity in this area of the insula is dramatically enhanced during the compassion practice compared to a neutral state. Among novice practitioners who were taught the same practice and who practiced for 1 week before coming into the laboratory, there's no difference. I'd like to now share with you and the audience findings from a very recent study where we are evaluating the nature of awareness during open presence. And this is a particular kind of meditation practice in the Buddhist tradition. And one of the expectations that we had of this practice is that there should be if we present a stimulus to a practitioner that tells the practitioner that in 10 seconds they will receive a very painful, physically painful stimulus. And the pain that we use is heat, and we can deliver it in a very safe way, and we give each person an experience of the heat before we start so that they know exactly what it feels like. And we tell them that when they get this cue, in 10 seconds, they'll get a very, very painful stimulus. And we conjectured that during open presence, since one moment of awareness is going to have less impact on the next, so that each moment would just be, experienced without influence of one moment to the next, that there should be a difference in the anticipation of the pain. And so in the next slide, we first show the ratings of the intensity and the unpleasantness of the pain. And in the bars that are marked OP, that stands for open presence. And what we can see is that the unpleasantness in the experts, who are in the red, is dramatically reduced compared to the novices who are displayed in the blue. There's relatively little difference in intensity, but there's a very large difference in unpleasantness. So we now go to the brain to see what is happening in the brain when we present a cue that indicates that a pain will be occurring in a few seconds. And so this is the way the experiment works. The practitioner begins meditation, and then the stimulus begins to get warm. And they're told that once it gets warm, in 10 seconds, it will get very, very hot and painful. And so the warm stimulus occurs at time 0, and then the heat occurs 10 seconds later. So the question is, what is going on in the brain as well as in the body when the practitioner gets the cue which informs him that the pain will be occurring soon? And what we see here is the period during anticipation as well as during the pain itself. So the red bar here is the practitioner, and the blue bar are the controls, who are the novices, who are just learning the practice. And the period just prior to the red line that begins at about 10 seconds in time is when the painful heat occurs. And what we see is that in the anticipation period, before the heat occurs, the blue bar, which is the novices, begins to activate. And it shows very, very high levels of activation just when the cue is presented, even though there's no pain. So the emotional areas of the brain that are responsive to the negative emotions that are associated with pain begin to show strong activation, even though there's no pain at all. So this is during the period. During the pain, yes, they're more anxious. So what we would say is that it's anticipatory.
But already informed.
They were already informed that.
Yes, they're already informed. And what we would say is that it's anticipatory anxiety. It's anxiety in anticipation. And it serves no useful function. And what we see in the practitioners who are displayed in red is that when the pain actually occurs, there's a very big response, but then it comes right back down to baseline. But there's very little anticipation. So, so this to
second go through those go to the second june or the labor that go my no me so data and go to when I'm saying level you could be come jump to data and go to the how the response.
So I'd like to now move on, mindful of time, I'm just going to go right ahead and talk a little bit about how we have considered the project of neurophenomenology and begun to explore it in the laboratory with the expert practitioners. And the motivation for this is that expert practitioners, because they are more familiar with their own mind, their reports of their experience should be more closely tied to what we actually can measure in the brain, compared to a novice practitioner who has spent much less time contemplating their mind. The reports that we get there, we wouldn't expect to be strongly associated with the brain. So that's what we tested here. So the way we did it is to have practitioners report on the clarity of their experience. And they are meditating, and while they're meditating, as their clarity begins to change, they press a keypad to indicate the extent of their clarity on a 1 to 9 point scale. So if their clarity is very low,
세자.
아래서 있어.
다 곰자가 간다 곰그 영어 줘 봐. 또 영어도 봐.
10에서
10에서 10.
일단 ninja 값을 but during compassion, right?
This is compassion.
Yeah.
The quality of compassion.
그래서 간다 나래 간다.
세죠.
로용 가르쳐 줘 그렇지. 그랬다는 세자다. 유익 말해. 쉐바코랑.
so if their clarity is low, they might rate it a 1, and then it can go up the scale. And this is one expert practitioner. And what this shows, Your Holiness, is on one scale is their report of clarity, and that's in the red line. And the blue line is the extent of these gamma oscillations that we talked about earlier. And this is showing the correspondence between their reports of clarity and the magnitude of these gamma oscillations from the beginning to the end of a meditation period. And what this shows is a very close association between their reports of clarity and these gamma oscillations. And this is not true for just a single practitioner, but it happens in all of the practitioners that we have observed. So this is another practitioner at different points in time, and this is showing also very strong associations. And this is just a representation of 9 practitioners, and what it is showing is the association, the strength of the correspondence between the reports of clarity and the magnitude of these gamma oscillations, which are depicted in blue for each of the 9 practitioners. And for some practitioners, we had different sessions, different days that they were meditating. And so that's depicted here. And across these 9 practitioners, there is overall a very close association between their reports of their experience and the magnitude of gamma oscillations. In the novice practitioners, the average correlation is 0. They're just not associated whatsoever. And so to us, what this reflects is that the reports of experience from expert practitioners are remarkably more closely associated with measures of brain function that we could take as the meditation practice unfolds.
5 minutes, Richard.
그만 고난주. 니지 곰 비탈로 근데 좀 슬라버봐. 비타고 좀 슬라버다. 레벨 남주 가마 오슬레이션이 보르리 대바 쇼좀 쇼도스. 단 곰담 냐와 메드니조 곰이 하고 쇼 좀 슬라버다. 그 레벨 남주 되니 대화자는 메드스. 즉 냐보 tempo도스. 또 곰제버돌이야. 군도 하고 좀 슬라면은 레벨 남주 그 가마 오슬레이션 대 하고 옆체. 그 칸에 남았다. 제tum 나오.
The final topic, and this just shows, before I get to the final topic, this just shows that the association between the gamma oscillations and reports of experience are strongest in the prefrontal area of the brain. And that's what's depicted on this plot, showing the red in the front. So the final topic is on attention. And I'd like to read for Your Holiness and for the audience one of my all-time favorite quotes from a Western psychologist. And this was written by William James in 1890. from his Principles of Psychology, and he has a whole chapter in that 2-volume text, a whole chapter on attention. And he says in that chapter, the faculty of voluntarily bringing back a wandering attention over and over again is the very root of judgment, character, and will. No one is compos sui if he have it not. An education which should improve this faculty would be the education par excellence. But it is easier to define this ideal than to give practical directions for bringing it about. And I think that if William James had more exposure to the contemplative traditions, he would have seen that there are methods available for educating attention. And the italics in this quote actually is in the original William James.
나를 간다. 정말 제 투비나 이게 시리 그 남자한테 시고 제 투비 그랬어. 정말 제가 칸을 라면 내려거든 정말 제가 가고 싶었어. 근데 그러나서는 딱 남보다는 못 되고 중요하나. 정말로 간다. 이 지도 들이야. 이를 제가 정말 제 고유의 부지식.
And Dan just reminded me that I have 2 minutes left. So in 2 minutes, just to say that one of the ways we've evaluated attention in many different ways, and one of the ways we evaluate attention is what's called the attentional blink task, which is a very, very interesting phenomenon. And what it involves is simply the fact that if you are presented with very, very rapid stimuli, like if you are presented with letters 10 times a second, so each letter is only appearing for 1/10 of a second. If every now and then you introduce a number and you ask a person to report on the number, if you present one number and then a second number quickly after it, they don't see the second number. Most people don't see the second number. And it's as if they get so excited at the first number that they lose the ability to see the second number. They become blinded, or their attention blinks. And it's a kind of identification or attachment to the first number, and so they don't see the second number. And so we tested whether 3 months of intensive meditation would change that. And it changes it very dramatically. So people are much more sensitive and aware, and they're much less likely to show this attentional blink. So I won't show those data.
나는 구조들이 attentional blinks 랍도 그 당부 얘기 장난인데 안기된 두고 다 땡고 좀 안기다 가서도 슬라베나 아니 대체로 봐 대체고 또 안기직 통보시도 남성 문제 제도가 할려서 제제네 로양제 안기 니베된 두고는 마통도 그랬어.
And finally, this is the most important slide. I just want to, every day I feel such tremendous gratitude for the wonderful people, many of whom you met, Your Holiness, when you were last in Madison, who are the ones who are actually doing the work. And Antoine Lutz in particular has been such an important part of this endeavor. And John Dunn was a faculty member at the University of Wisconsin when this work first began, and was so influential in helping us. And also, of course, Matula, and work that I haven't had time to talk about today with mindfulness-based stress reduction has been so importantly helped by the wonderful collaboration and friendship with John Kabat-Zinn, who's with us today. So I'd like to just end with thanking all those people and thanking you, Your Holiness.
Richie, thank you for that state-of-the-art overview of some of your findings. Before we move on, Your Holiness, do you have any questions?
It's only saying that there's been an attention blink on his
No, actually,
having caught the first number, he then didn't see the second.
actually, I think knowing that means that you don't have an attentional blink.
That makes sense, Kimdo. Kimdo.
Nothing particular.
Okay.
Digital translate. Level rank niveau chava yonamena. Dishaya Dalia Daji mi Yujik. Loju Kolia, go Daji Chiche. The Loju Chibishu, Daji Chavina, or the lawyer Ganuchinova. Could chava yonamena sometimes. The Dean level rank on it, Gia. Chiclay. Kushukjinchi. Right. Tako Lu get already, got some new niveau called Shukshay, so that's some new niveau in Shukshay Yuina. Lu Gavin, some new niveau Chicotek. The Lord Jangbe Michi. Lord Jangbe Michi, Lord Ju Conley, Dutch Shayundu, Copechicta, Danzan Chichundor. Tako Lord Chibe Shugo, Dara. 곰자당 직티 차상도 찍을 하신 재미나 곰로당 찍을 쳐야지 이내다 로게르시브 있잖아요. 조조연은 나서 같은 템플. 뒤에는 레버리안도 수시모 입어서 숙제를 쉬어도 좀 입어서.
One question.
시베는 짱짱한 손에 집에 있는 디파이스 요동어서.
One question that did come up is the role aging process might play.
What
Aging process, age.
aging?
Yeah, old age. So for example, in the case of, imagine a meditator, expert practitioner that you have tested.
당연 에이스님도 그냥 디나. 시바라는 niveau 또 때문에 이남야 지금 레벨 0 niveau 또 때문에 이나. 다 레벨 0 niveau 때문에 이나. 에이징 쉐인드는 요죠.
네. 난 다시 제스티 로장마다 마장니 보를 개발했던 거로.
맞아. 다들로 장배 미치라. 미치라.
His Holiness is, the question is arising from the fact that what you see, even in the case of an expert practitioner, in the scanner, in the brain gamma oscillation and the other brain activity, he's wondering whether, to what extent, this is purely a function of mental development, or to what extent it is a kind of a brain development in some sense. The process is, the change in the process is coming at the brain level. So if it is,
of course, our viewpoint, consciousness, brain, actually do. So in order to know the effect come from mainly consciousness or the physical level.
From the brain processes themselves.
If come from consciousness, then age not much differences. Mainly the physical level, the main factor. Then age make differences. Therefore, I just felt it's the same practitioner like with you. It's the same kind of sort of meditation. Try to exactly the same sort of meditation. And picture 10 years ago. After 10 years, some brain level change. Obviously, it doesn't go more to the degree.
Of course, he becomes more bold,
So there's sort of external appearances. So in the brain cell also you see
some aging process.
10 years you see some differences. So wondering, same sort of picture, same result,
here, if the brain expression of Matthew's meditation practice 10 years before and 10 years after shows exactly the same pattern, then His Holiness would argue, he would infer from this that the main effect is really coming from the mental processes itself.
Yeah, I mean, do we know, Your Holiness, that the meditation state itself doesn't also show age-related changes?
look.
로케베 겐기야 곰코라네 벌레 기반도 마르베스.
I think there are different kind of sort of meditation. Some meditation related with zarungduna.
Some meditation practices involves utilization of pranas.
So that kind of meditation, of course, getting older, more difficult. Then other type of meditation, share sorbe takanda, lo chang ma to zolung ma zhi de, that depends on.
So in those second type of practices where the utilization of physiological processes is not involved, where the cultivation is purely at the mental level, one wouldn't expect to see much change as a result of aging.
Well, one of the issues that we've talked about in one of the sessions earlier, it may have been with the scientists, is the idea that with practice, with familiarization, certain practices become more effortless. And if they become more effortless, then some of the brain changes which do occur with age, inevitable brain changes which occur with age, may not be as crucially important for those practices once they become so highly familiar that they can be done effortlessly. So that's a hypothesis which can be tested and can be evaluated. We don't know the answer to that. But to the extent that the practice really has become effortless, my expectation would be that the age-related changes which do occur in the brain would be less likely to have an impact on that. But Wolf, you may have some other perspective on this.
No, I have exactly the same aspect, but we did a study on intentional blink, comparing young people and old people, those with meditation and those without. And the attentional blink increases steadily with... It's not working?
Sound?
It's working. The attentional blink increases steadily with age. So old people have a much longer attentional blink. But old meditators have the same short attentional blink as young people. So it seems to arrest the aging process, at least for this function. 70-year-old meditators, we looked at a group of Vietnamese monks that are in Frankfurt, and they have an attentional blink as short as 20-year-old students. Good message.
There's also the fact that if the meditator is a serious meditator, that during 10 years he will have to continue to train. Yeah. So since we know from other studies that the more we train, the more the skills increase, so there's a counterbalancing effect as well.
Yeah.
So it could even be better after 10 years, even if it gets older.
So this morning we heard from Jimpala about the path, but we just heard that there was a path. We didn't hear much about the details. And we've asked Matthew to give us, to unpack that, to go into more detail about the specifics of practice, and to do it in a way that it engages neuroscience.
So this morning, student Jimbala said that he's feeling like passing exam, but I don't feel even to qualify to reach to the level of passing exams. So it's more like exposing my own shortcomings or lighting a match in clear daylight. But anyway, I heard a lot from my great teachers, His Holiness and Ryokan Moshe, so I'll try my best. So, as student Jimbala said this morning, he outlined very well the ground, path, and fruit, and view, meditation, action, as well as the 3 types of training on discipline, concentration, and wisdom. So how do you actually apply that? And how does it relate to our studies? So when we began our studies, we thought we could try all kinds of meditations and training. But then we quickly remembered what Israel has said this morning, that there are two main goals: to expand our knowledge, and also what contribution can we make to society. So in the very beginning, almost like playing, we tried devotion, visualizations, all kinds of things. But we thought we're not going to teach that in education in a secular way. So that's why we chiefly concentrated on focused attention, on cultivating altruistic love and compassion, and emotional balance to open presence, because those could be easily, the universal value of those trainings could easily be available for children, for adults, for all kinds of walks of life in a secular way. But of course, those comes from the complete part of practice. So now, this is a very vast subject, of course, like the words of the Buddha from Sanskrit into Tibetan fill 103 volumes. The commentary of all the great pandits is 213 volumes, so it's hard to summarize in 12 minutes. But basically, the Tibetan word for Buddha, Sangye, gives the idea. Sang means to purify, to clarify, eliminate all veils and obscuration that need to be eliminated. And Gye means to bloom, to complete, to bring to perfection everything that needs to be developed and cultivated. So fundamentally, what do we need to purify or to get rid of is the fundamental ignorance, as we defined it this morning, misconstruing reality, and the effect of this misconstruing reality, that is the 5 mental toxins, including, of course, mental confusion, but also hatred, craving, arrogance, envy, and so forth, that completely obscures our mind and brings suffering. So what needs to be cleared is ignorance and its consequences in terms of suffering. What needs to be cultivated or developed are the wisdom, and then what goes together with wisdom, the compassion. And ultimately what is perfected is consummate wisdom, perfect wisdom, unconditional compassion to all sentient beings, and freedom from all the causes of suffering. Now, how do we go about that? That's where the graded part comes about, and practice. So there are, each aspect of the part, there are things to be purified, there are things to be matured, and there are things to be perfected. It's da means Dzogchen in Tibetan. So then, how do you get into that? First, you must bring your mind onto some kind of path. If you think that samsara is such a great place, then why should you want to get out of that? So, and very often we are addicted to the cause of suffering. That's our problem. So, most of those paths begin by deep reflection. And by the way, when we say meditation or bhavana or cultivating or familiarization, there's always 2 aspects. Analytical. What is the nature of the world? We can analyze whether the phenomena are permanent or impermanent. Are they autonomous or interdependent? That has huge consequences on our happiness and suffering. But then also there's to integrate that. So now, at the beginning, we need to combine those by reflections that will turn our mind and set us on this path of liberation and enlightenment. So first of all, we need to value the potential that we have, precious human existence. If we think that doesn't matter how we spend this life, and then we die just as with empty hands, as we say. It's like going to Jewel Island and coming with empty hands. We need to appreciate that even we have this precious human life, it won't last long. It can be taken away any moment. Death is certain, the time is uncertain. Those are crucial reflections. And if we want to get free from suffering, we cannot just do anything that comes in our mind. The law of causality says that there are things that will bring suffering, some that will contribute to alleviate suffering. And then somehow we need to recognize that you cannot repair samsara. It's a hopeless sort of endless conflict and suffering. So we need to find ways to get out of this. So that's what will bring your mind. That's what fundamental reflection that any practitioner will begin with. And this will be aspect of meditation. That will be aspect of reflection. And then we say, who can help me in this hopeless state? Then you think about ordinary people, parents, educators, they're all in the same boat, in the same mess. So then that's why the notion of refuge, not just being simply the fears of samsara, but the fear of continuing all of us to endlessly suffer. So what can do? Someone who has got out of suffering. So that's what an enlightened being like the Buddha. How did he get out of it? That's his teaching, the Dharma. And who can help me on the way? That's the companion. So the notion of refuge makes a sense. It's not just a blind faith refuge. And then, so we will practice on that. And practically, there are a set of practices that will repeat many times. There's a well-known so-called fundamental or preliminary practice. Each of those steps will be done 100,000 times. Why? There's no magic number. It's simply we're lazy. So we need some kind of encouragement to do this 100,000 times, or we don't do it at all, basically. So this is the actual sitting where we will take refuge 100,000 times with the visualization, with the right attitude. And then we will think, should I do that only for myself? It's meaningless. If all my friends are in jail and I just get out of jail, I'm alone out there, it seems to be pointless. I go back to jail because my friends are there. So then the spirit of enlightenment. I will do that. I will achieve enlightenment so that I gain the capacity to free all beings. So that's the bodhicitta. Bodhicitta has to be prepared by boundless loving kindness, boundless compassion, boundless rejoicing, boundless unbiased equanimity or impartiality. But then we'll also recite 100,000 times this, not just mechanically reciting, but with putting our whole intention, cultivation. So that's a process. Then if we are on any travel, there are obstacles, we need provisions, and we need to dispel, to clear all the way. So clearing the way are purification practice. And what we purify is not by some kind of original sin, because according to Buddhism, we have the Buddha nature, original goodness. But everything that obscures that, all the veils of emotions, the veils that distort reality, we need to clear that. So there's a practice for that, with visualization. There are beautiful images. Of course, we cannot go in detail. But we also will do 100,000 times those practices. That will take, even you do that full time, it will take a month or two. Then we need provisions on the path, accumulation of merit and wisdom. So there are practices specifically related to this accumulation, making boundless offerings in your mind, offering the whole universe in all its beauty, offering your own body mentally, offering all the virtue that you have done. So that will be also done 100,000 times. And then you start with this limited mind. And especially in many aspects of Buddhism, especially in Tibetan Buddhism, there's a special relation with a spiritual teacher, which has a vast, compassionate wisdom mind. And we start with this limited, fragmented, selfish mind. So there's a practice called Guru Yoga. It means to unite with the Guru's mind. That means our small mind, as Swamiji said, which is like in a small vase, so break away and merge with the wisdom mind of the teacher. So that's one step that we also do, accompanied with mantras, with reciting verses that will remind us that. Of course, all of those steps will also go with the contemplative aspect of sitting and integrating that. And then we go to the next step, which is to change our perception of the phenomenal world. Usually we divide this in pleasant, unpleasant, beautiful, ugly, desirable, undesirable. From the Buddhist perspective, this is called impure perception. Impure because it doesn't correspond to reality. If we understand reality as being devoid of intrinsic existence, a rose is not intrinsically beautiful, it's just my mind, somehow I feel it like that. A goat will think it's a nice salad, as another organism will see as nothing. So we have this impure perception. So then there's a vast richness of visualization. And sometimes people are quite hard to understand why there's so much imagery, so much kind of deities and mandalas. What do they mean? It's simply a way to not to make some even more artificial projection upon reality, but to recognize our own true nature. Those are symbolic representations. For instance, Avalokiteshvara, which are 4 arms, It's not that any being somewhere has four arms, it's the four boundless of compassion, loving kindness, equanimity, and rejoicing. So likewise, we will, with the help of that, recognize what we call the infinite purity of phenomena. That means all phenomena, no matter what, comes into phenomena through their empty nature, through interdependence. They are not solidly existing. That's how they are pure in a way. So if we can recognize that, it's pure from the superimposition, from the projection, from the distortions. So that's a very important part of the practice, because we are so much enmeshed in that delusion, so we need a strong antidote. So all that is the play of antidotes versus the things that needs to be purified, matured, and perfected. Then we go to some practices. So that also will take a long time, and it could take years, and we could continue throughout our life along with other practice, doing visualization, recitation, understanding the ultimate nature of phenomena. Basically, the union of appearance and emptiness. That's sort of the essence of those visualization practices. Then, of course, as we mentioned, there are inner practices with the prana, with the channels, with the energies. That's also a part that is sometimes cultivated. But ultimately, as the Buddha said, this whole teaching is about transforming the mind. He said, give up all unvirtue or negativity, perfect all virtue, and to transform the mind. That's the Buddha's teaching, or to subdue the mind. So in the end, we have to understand that famous sort of mind, what's behind that. So there are a lot of practices to help one see the workings of the mind, how thoughts come, how one emotion comes and invades the mind, what kind of antidote, direct antidote, like loving kindness or benevolence to subdue hatred, or not identifying with hatred, just the awareness that is aware of hatred, but there's no hate in awareness. So there's countless profound, skillful methods that we can use at all times to be first more aware of what's going on in the mind, and to slowly phase away the mental toxins, to replace them by only wholesome mental state, like compassion and so forth. But in the end, it also comes to the ultimate understanding of awareness. What is the fundamental nature of mind? It is given many different names. We could call the luminous continuum of the fundamental mind. We could call that the recognition of the Buddha nature. We could call that pure awareness, and so forth. And that's where it becomes the most contemplative aspect. This is something that lies behind the curtain of thoughts, of discursive thoughts. It is what is left when there is no content even. So in a way, this morning and yesterday, a lot was said about the unknown, the undescribable, the absolute truth. Well, it is, as it says also by Shantideva, the absolute truth is sort of beyond the intellect. It's not the object of discursive, reflective words, descriptions, and so forth. It doesn't mean that it's out of reach of the experience. That would mean that the Buddha would not know what is unknown. There will be something that will be forever unreachable. It's simply that it is not knowable. It is not known by an ordinary deluded mind that is constantly veiled by dualistic grasping, by mental toxins, by fundamental ignorance. But when those are dispelled, what is left is pure awareness. And it's a non-dual, self-luminous awareness that is given different names. And ultimately, this is one of the quality of the unchanging wisdom of Buddhahood. So that's a very short overview of the path. But the main point is that all those steps need to be cultivated again and again. Bhavana, gom, means to cultivate, to become familiar. It's something that will only come to the taste of experience. And of course, the clear, unmistaken instruction that comes from the scriptures, that come from a qualified, authentic spiritual teacher who can condense those 84,000 sections of the Dharma into pit instructions that on the path he will deliver to the disciple as he or she progresses on the path, and give it the right instruction at the moment where the disciple is able to precisely benefit from those instructions because the maturation process is just such that is ready to cross that next step. So there we need determination and enthusiasm and endeavor, but no impatience. When the weed grows, there's no point pulling the green grass. It won't grow faster. You will just kill the weed. But the maturation process will take time. But that time is the sign that something is really happening. So we should not hope for swift reward, but we should practice, as Milarepa said, until our head falls, I mean the last breath of our life. And the other great yogi Shapka said, may the duration of your practice be the duration of your life. And so that's, I think, the ideal of a practitioner. So definitely it's not a quick fix, but it is also the most worthy thing you can do, because once you have a sense of direction, it doesn't matter if there's 10,000 kilometers to go, and it won't help if you work sideways or backwards. The best way is to still continue to move forwards. So that's what the path is about.
Thank you, Michael. Was that right, Your Holiness? Was he right?
Normal.
Very good.
Okay. You got a good grade.
You passed the exam.
John, did you have? No. Okay. We've just heard an extraordinary overview of the path, and we've also seen some very fine, hard data. How did you get there from here? How did you two collaborate? How did you know what to study? How did you tell us?
Well, Matthew, you want to go first?
I mean, did you suggest what should be studied, or did you offer a menu, or?
Well, at some point we have to adjust ourselves, because
Mutual calibration.
mutual calibrations.
저부터 송대 전 제버봐.
And that was going on.
도마 간데스 고조버스. 아니 가르제가 제부유면.
안도 편지를 뒷대야 말봐. 대바 쎄시 건배 그도 레바 가르고 가르고 와.
그래.
다야 지 미다고 쎄시도 건배 내가 가르고 와. 뒤안다. 양변에 지 짬도 지 좀 당황해야지. 또 삼잖아요. 그러니까 지단 동네들이 삼다니잖아요. 심도 düğüm yani.
그래.
그게 연대한테 팬이를 삼잖아요. 심도지 방 터고 yani. That level of yoga to that one.
So His Holiness is wondering, up to this point, probably this research has not been done, but maybe we could look at specific types of states. For example, there is a general understanding in the Buddhist tradition that when you focus your mind on cultivating certain qualities such as deep devotion to your teacher or great admiration, cultivate a state of mind in a very admiring state, there is an understanding that the mind sort of lifts up. It's in a more uplifted state of mind. But on the other hand, when you reflect upon the suffering nature, there's a certain dampening effect on the mind. So therefore, his question is, would you be thinking of imagining a situation where you would study a practitioner who will be remain in a single-pointed state of deep devotion or faith, or a deep state of admiration, or a very deep state of reflecting upon suffering?
Well, I think that the ability of a practitioner to remain focused in that way would, I think, maximize the likelihood that we would actually see differences if a practitioner was filled with a deep admiration compared to a situation where they were just very focused on suffering. I think that there clearly would be a difference. From all we know about the brain and emotion, we should be able to see those kinds of differences.
Actually, we did that in 2001, then doing a Mögu, this unconditional devotion,
yes.
and I was really thinking so deeply of my teacher that I had tears in my eyes. But we thought that to study that for months and years and involve a lot of resources, this didn't seem to have an immediate, fulfilling the goal of pursuing secular contribution. But as fundamental research, I think that we could possibly now come back to that and investigate those other states like mental imagery, focusing on the visualization or focusing on devotion to the guru. I mean, those, of course, are very different states, even both involve focused attention.
the secular system.
또 미세다 대위다 차도 말아.
Right.
디차네 하고 벤조 망보 땅고 걸 디마제나 시즌 구주 신다 제브레스. 근데 the basic science 그 돈에 야 다시 제거의 자유로 와. 전에 오메로.
레벨 좋아가지고.
그래, basic science 그 돈에.
야마 디스 안되는 유승되기가 가서 저기. 랑그 동에 소리 전에 구조태세 레바디다. 닝지 현유 동에 숙청 소리 전에 레바 구조태세 찍을 수 있어요.
No. One was referring to an earlier statement in one of the earlier Mind and Life dialogues. Someone mentioned the fact that at the brain level, the pain centers that gets activated when you are undergoing your own pain seems to be also the same centers that are associated in empathy when you take upon when you view someone else's pain.
It's actually, that's the seminal work of Wolf's daughter, Tanya Singer, who you've met on a number of occasions, Your Holiness, who showed exactly that. Yes.
Now I'm wondering, anger or compassion during dream time also is occur. Sometimes even sort of tear, too much sort of compassion sort of experience during dream, and actually tear come. So I'm wondering, the awakening state, while the sensorial sort of consciousness still function or active, and meditate on, because the meditate or I don't know, anger, develop anger, and dream time, this sensorial consciousness not active. So what's the differences at the brain level?
Well, actually, Your Holiness, we're involved right now in probably the largest study that's ever been done on meditation and sleep, where we have practitioners come to the laboratory, both expert as well as more novice practitioners. And in some cases, the experts will practice for a day intensively, and then they go into the sleep laboratory at night. And we monitor their brain activity during sleep and during dreams to evaluate just these sorts of questions. One of the really interesting things is from modern research, we know that one of the areas of the brain that's most active during dreaming sleep is the amygdala. The amygdala is an area that's been implicated in emotion. So it will be very interesting to see how the practitioners, particularly after we have them come in and spend a day doing meditating on compassion, and we also have them doing a day where they're doing a vipassana practice, and looking at the difference in the influence on the brain during sleep and dreaming. So we don't know the answer yet, but we're actually collecting the data.
So far, have you come across any sort of practitioner or ordinary people who can develop sort of awareness during dream? Now I'm in the state of sleep, and now I'm dreaming. There are people.
Yes, yes, we have tested a
So
couple of...
what differences?
w-
So His Holiness is wondering whether you would see a difference between just ordinary people who are not able to recall that they are dreaming, be aware that they are dreaming, and those individuals who seem to have this capacity, practitioners or not, become aware. Become aware
during sleep.
whilst in dream.
Well, we have some very preliminary data, which is very preliminary, but we've just analyzed the first group of 6 practitioners that we've tested during sleep, and the gamma oscillations that we see during waking that I've shown you, we find are present during sleep in these longer-term practitioners. And we have not seen these kind of gamma oscillations during sleep before. And so this is something that may be associated with the increased propensity to be aware during dreaming. So that's something that we're actually looking at. But the presence of these gamma oscillations during sleep is very unusual. But getting back to Dan's question, Your Holiness, I wanted to just ask you, Mathieu and I and several other groups in North America have been collaborating, and there are some wonderful fruits of the direct collaboration between contemplatives and scientists. And I wonder if you can speak to our Indian brothers and sisters about the prospect of collaboration here in India, and what suggestion or advice you may have to help promote that in the Indian context.
Some time ago, our meeting, I mentioned, you see, there are some practitioners, I think some sadhu, see, actually, you see, who spent, I think, years in mountain area. And some cases I was told, very cold place, but naked. So certainly they have the practice or experience of Kundalini, Kundalini.
Tumu.
Tumu.
Yeah, Tumu. The Tumu practice.
And then, so it's such people, obviously, through training, through because of the meditation, and a certain body's element,
Become expressed now.
Never pain.
So some properties of the body, within the body, has become really advanced. Regents Lama. Yes.
And that deep, nam chongyu be kodo any re chunal ba chong chu chongnal ba dindegi ta lu domra ma to kage mebche and chu kasa chunal ba shebe re ko lambati ka and la bo su sin dibaka yang ba yang ko ta chen chigla chen thoda chigli ya dindi chile ji nga chu dindi chayang.
So there are yogis who actually test their level of tumo efficiency by being in a very cold place and with only a very simple loins cloth, and the test involves during the night to wear a cloth that has been soaked in water and wrapping themselves over, and it is said that they can go through 5 or 6 rounds of this wet cloth during the night and dry it up.
So one now no longer on this planet, but I know one. It seems he has some sort of extraordinary experiences.
Yes.
And sort of through exercise, through practice of control inner energy. For example, when chud, shuoma, then
So this particular meditator who's no longer with us, as a result of his control of the physiological processes, is able to draw in through his sexual organ liquids like water and milk.
So you see, so that means certain ability, control inner energy or lung. So some cases, through meditation, you should put some sand here, and then energy left.
So from the tip of the finger, and then literally blow the dust, but just keeping over it.
Now, unfortunately, no one here. So such things you see happen. Actually, some people actually notice or observed it, saw like that. So in any way, sadhu, some sadhu, I think still is available, isn't it? I think eventually we should, you see, firstly communicate with such people. This is not because of them making their name or something, publicity, but simply try to show through scientific way, through meditation, actual body element can control or can change. It is important. There are such people there. So I think among Buddhists, among the Buddhists, also is some people, the problem is they don't care about our sort of the activities. They do not understand.
So for them it feels like the scientific experiments is like playing playing over them, playing on them.
Some form of exploitation of their spiritual experiences. But actually, you see, these are important, isn't it? This is my view.
Yes.
But sometimes it's difficult to pursue such people. And then also is some people claim some very extraordinary sort of power or something. That I am very skeptical. I don't believe. If we ask them, then please come here, we're going to test. I think then they do not dare.
So Your Holiness, you're giving a very difficult task to our Indian colleagues. They're telling them to find the most talented, advanced meditators who don't want to be studied.
네,
I think Wolf had a comment.
Yeah, it was just following up what you said, that there are some of the phenomena observed here which advanced meditators take for granted. For them, this is just natural. For us scientists,
Yes.
this is an enormous challenge, because if these things really happen, we know that we do something wrong, because for many of these phenomena we have no explanation whatsoever. It does not fit the current scheme of our descriptions. So it would be of utmost importance if we would have reproducible phenomena of that kind, because science requires some reproducibility, to see whether this is really there. And if it is, then we can try to find out what it is. But it could also be that we have to give in and say we cannot explain, and that's the end of our abilities. So I think it's a very important step to be taken. And the problem is reproducibility. And it could be that many of these phenomena just occur once in the life of one person. That there are singularities because time flows and they never come back and you cannot predict them. So have you got an example of any of these phenomena that would be the best to approach? Because it is simple in your eyes, reproducible.
나 배준데 내가 처리도는 제버지야. 즉 대만 직접 많이
근데 지들들이 근데 안데 내가 진짜 냠누도 되지 장도 제마도 계도 말이 계도 우리 진짜 가시 지금 냠 그들이야 용등에 야고 장 사도 장 좋으면 되잖아요 그 롱대상 줘서 그런 용등에 그런 말이 용등에 다 장네 중대들이 남 딕다 가소리 이 고메이나 이 다다 되고 이거 다다 가소리 말에 뭐 최대 중에서도 말해
A distinction needs to be made between certain types of what ordinarily might seem as unique, characteristics of individuals' behavior. There are certain, in some cases, there are trained and acquired capacities. So in which case one would expect these to be reproducible because they are acquired, trained characteristics. But in some cases there are individuals who may have some inborn kind of, characteristics, in which case, because they are not acquired through training, then they are unpredictable. You don't know when it's going to come. So one needs to make a distinction between these two. But what His Holiness is talking about are the first type, the characteristics that are acquired through training.
So my part, of course, I will give in my mind, and when such occasions come, such person, if
I meet,
yeah.
I meet,
and I will pursue them, and then also meantime, among Hindu practitioner or Jain practitioner, certainly, I think possible. Firstly, we inquire, then when we find such people, then request them this kind of the test is something important, necessary. So then they may agree. And we can arrange special sort of room where some ice put. And they remain still negative.
Actually,
So,
this was done at Harvard University by Herbert Benson.
but that side,
Yes,
that side.
but it didn't work out too well.
Oh.
I think it was very difficult to do the experiment because they had so many different probes inside of the yogi's body that he wasn't able to meditate adequately. And I think that's one of the difficulties of this kind of study, is that it can be very disturbing.
Yes, that's
even
right.
for the adept, if the experiment itself is too invasive, drawing blood and so on, then these kinds of studies can be very difficult to execute properly. So that was actually, I think, a failure for Benson. He wasn't able to study Tummo adequately because of this situation. One of these yogis, I think you knew.
Yes,
Kunten, and,
some of that I know.
Yes, yeah. And I actually took care of him for a few days while he was there. And this was many years ago. Mm-hmm. And he was very happy to participate, but he said he was not really able to make the Tummo energy blaze because of the conditions in the laboratory.
But
So
was it was it collaborative in the sense that Rich and
no, and I
Matthew-
think that's the issue here, is that, and I recall in some of the context of experimental design that I was also involved in, that a lot of in order to do these types of studies, these are very difficult, I think, but even to do something more mundane concerning emotional reactivity, how can compassion meditation change one's reactivity to negative emotions? Even to study that adequately, I think, takes a very careful dialogue between the practitioner and the scientist, so that the practice is really carefully understood on the one hand, and its effects can be properly measured on the other. And that took a long time, I think, in the context of the studies at Wisconsin.
So just to continue in the spirit of dialogue, I first wanted to thank Your Holiness and all the other presenters here for organizing this meeting, because as you pointed out, the Nalanda tradition is perhaps being revived. So I might want to call it the Navya Nalanda tradition.
Nalanda Sama.
Right? And that perhaps one of the ways in which this revival will take place is through inputs from the Tibetan texts that are now being made available back in both in Sanskrit and in English, and of course science, because again science was not alien to that cultural ethos. And I think that there's a parallel here between what happened in the West perhaps in the 15th century, where Greek material became available through Arabic, and the sciences started. The revival of the sciences in the West was itself due to new material coming from other parts of the world. So I do think that Indians should embrace these different influences, while, of course, sticking to what we do well. And there's a famous, of course, saying by Gandhiji saying that I want to open the windows of my house to the world, but I don't want to be blown off my feet. So, right? And in that spirit, I of course, it interests me how such a wonderful collaboration has happened, and I just want to make a couple of suggestions about how this form of collaboration could be extended. I myself am a theoretical scientist, and one of the most important developments in science is not just and which differentiates modern science from earlier Western approaches to the natural world, is that theoretical advances were exceptionally important, especially the use of mathematics and other technical languages. So how Galileo and Newton used mathematics to explore the physical world is the paradigm upon which the rest of the sciences are based on. And one thing I notice in the Indian literature is the extensive theoretical vocabulary and technical taxonomy and other literature that is available. And so along with the sharing of ideas between contemplative practitioners and experimental scientists, I believe that there should be a similar and parallel interaction between the theoretical basis of the modern cognitive and neurosciences and the corresponding literature in the Tibetan and in the Sanskrit sources. So, for example, in the Abhidharma literature, there's a very detailed taxonomy of mental states, whether it is contemplative or not. One of the things to do would be to see if we can collect this kind of mental taxonomy from the different traditions from India and East Asia, and learn how to operationalize them and perhaps build upon that taxonomy. This is now wild speculation, but a crucial departure from which modern science took was what Newton and Leibniz did by replacing old geometry by calculus, right? And my question would be, if a similar kind of technical and theoretical advance took place which is based in the traditional Indic sources, but makes a step forward, that would be a huge benefit for everybody. And that contemplative neuroscience and what I would call contemplative psychophysics should be a field in which theory, experiment, and philosophy are integrated and take as many different sources as possible. I just don't think we should make any differentiation between science or Sanskrit, because ultimately these are all just different human sources of knowledge that everybody should use.
All right.
No.
Good. Yes.
I think we've been speaking at a very interesting level in terms of a certain level of abstraction and very advanced practices, Your Holiness. And I wanted to ask you also your opinion on another style of research that's been very important in Richie's lab. So some of this type of research is often called basic science, and even examining, let's say, Tumo. So my colleague at Emory University, Chuck Raison, in fact, became interested in the study of meditation through the study of this Jandali, the Tumo energy, because it seems to be related possibly to the immune system, in fact. And he also was never able to really, they actually do have a study now, a new one at Boston University, studying Tumo adepts, but there is no results from that study yet. But he eventually then, because he was a clinician, he became interested also in the application of meditation practices in a secular context. And one of the big questions in that context is, what are the key ingredients of a meditation that one can extract from the traditional context and apply them to a clinical context? So as you know, at Emory University, my colleague Gishilo Tenzin has developed this cognitive-based compassion training, which is based upon a traditional Tibetan form of compassion meditation, extracted from that, and now is being used for foster children. For example, the government of the state of Georgia, where Emory is located, has sponsored a very extensive research project on this compassion protocol that's completely secular for these foster children. And likewise, Jimbala, I know, is involved at Stanford University with a similar style of research. I'm wondering, in the context of the Indic practices, do you think this is also a practical way to go? Not so, perhaps a little bit less, how to put it, a little bit less mystical and a little bit less fantastic than examining some of the more advanced practices, but looking a little bit more concretely at the effects of practices on ordinary persons and how they might be translated into the lives of ordinary persons. Do you think this style of research also is quite feasible here in India? And do you have any suggestions?
I think many of you already know, but I do some may not know. So I want to share. That is, actually, when we start this dialogue, sometimes people use the word dialogue between, complicated. Dialogue between Buddhism and science. And I thought that's wrong. That creates sort of the wrong impression, right? Or misunderstanding. And actually, Buddhism only for Buddhists, not universal. And also, I think this morning I mentioned two purposes. One, simply expand our knowledge. And then also even the more sort of spiritual side, that also a secular basis. So therefore, as soon as you touch Buddhism, then no longer as a secular. So therefore, right from the beginning, I make clear transitate, shimavinisusitati.
So this morning a reference was made to the nature of reality, the ground.
That's simply, what is the reality? No idea of langdur.
No evaluative judgment of what is right and what is wrong.
So Buddhism is mentioned about this mind in order to practice to carry Buddhist path. But we can live it. Simply try to know the reality. So that I call Buddhist science, about matters, about minds, about time. So I mentioned, you see, we should use the word dialogue between modern science and Buddhist science, not Buddhism. So 3 parts: Buddhist science, on that basis, some Buddhist concept,
Philosophy.
and also philosophy. There may be some
Aspects.
as is sort of the universal of the concept, maybe. Some of the very close related with Buddhist religion. So there are 2. One part in the Buddhist philosophy can be
Seen as universal.
the basis or
Closer to, no, it's a support of. Yeah.
support of secular ethics. Then Buddhist religion. So I want to tell you that when we carry this research, like others Jains or different Hindus, this is the religious part
Should be left separated. No?
then the certain ideas, certain sort of
Concepts, practices.
But part, I think in those ancient Indian tradition, as I mentioned earlier, you see every tradition where the samadhi, vipassana, and nyumosati,
Kalesha.
naturally, the more explanation about consciousness, about mind. So that considered as a part of the science. Science. So that I think should
Be part of the dialogue. No?
part of the dialogue. And that is universal and something common and very useful for promoting secular ethics. So samadhi itself, very secular, secular sort of universal.
Samadhi as a mental quality is universal. In fact, in the Indo-Tibetan tradition, we refer to these meditative states as being part of the common currency of the classical Indian traditions.
So that I want to
Share.
and make clear. So there's nothing to do with one's own religion. As far as our approach, we are not seeking sort of support from science to Buddhism. No, never. Without scientific support, Buddhism will remain. And as well as Jainism or different Hinduism. 1,000 years. It brings immense benefit to practitioner. That's sufficient for survival. So whether scientists accept or not doesn't matter. So sometimes I used to telling some scientists, you see, they are out of their curiosity, it's a certain sort of the point, like next life. Then usually I say, oh, that is Buddhist business, not scientist business, like that. Like that. So that I think I should know. So our dialogue purely on the reality, not our practice. Like that.
Your Holiness,
Isn't it?
Yes? You've told us that many times.
what you say is very inspiring, and I would like to hear a few more words, because as you know, the various Indian traditions, and even within Buddhism itself, there are lots of debates about what is the nature of reality, right? I mean, there is both common currency using, say, the pramana systems, but also there is wide differentiation.
Yes.
So do you have any thoughts about how we can accommodate both, and not just the similarities, but also the differences?
맨날 가서
나를 때 초진에 한 테마다 되게 삼대한다 저저 투모만 부저로 다.
어.
이 레안 초진에 한 한편 두산 한편 저저 뭐 부저자. 제가 신고변에서 레더레데 인테야 신고변에서야 다당 또는 대신 맨다만 부여변자 다디 상만디나 그 리서치 넘버 키토야 답시를 가려놨어.
배는 쌤이 배보다 배 나를 씌웠을나 배 상황을 찍었어. 야, 배 잡아게 하면서. 다지 머리고 살는 것은 뭐이나? 애니 것은 다면 다. 그 다음에 저 전에 잡아요.
On the basic kind of ontological standpoint, for example, like the postulation of, matter and consciousness as two primary facts of the world, His Holiness was saying that he wouldn't expect there to be difference among the classical Indian traditions. Now, there might be difference on, for example, what is the specific nature of that ignorance? That's a fundamental ignorance. So then one might begin to see differences.
Even within the Buddhism, even within the Sanskrit tradition, there are differences.
Differences of
Due to different views. So like that. But Angus Lovina, as a memo to do the vision shaming, Angus said to do anger, Luna, you.
For example, like if we take the mental phenomena like anger, it's phenomenologically evident that most people will be able to identify what it feels like. I mean, even to some extent, animals too, when they see a hostile animal, they seem to sort of shy away from that angry animal.
So these are universal, and how harmful this destructive emotion. So if there is possibility to reduce these things, everybody accept, whether believer or non-believer. And positive emotions such as compassion. Also even animals appreciate. So these are universal. So here we are seeking some support from scientific some scientific research.
Scientific inquiry.
Mainly, they cultivate more compassionate sort of mind, immense benefit for one's own health, and the family, and the community. So these are, I think, as a result of collaboration, it's very, very useful. I think reality. The ordinary people, Buddha stayed that, Mahavira stayed that, may not pay much attention. Or latest scientific finding like that, they pay more attention. So sometimes I jokingly telling you, Buddhist, traditionally, three, refuge. Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. Now should be four, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, science. So these scientists become guru now. Yes?
John.
Well, actually, Rajesh's idea is an interesting one, Your Holiness, because I was also having a discussion with Dr. Nagendra at lunch, and one thought, there are differences among the traditions, and there are a lot of commonalities. And one thought was actually to look at, for example, a very specific aspect of cognition, for example. Let's say, look at attention. And in the Abhidharma, there are many features, mental facets, or semjung, that are about attention. Many of them, for example, Yitla Jeva, or Manasikara, and Drempa, or Smrti. But there are others that are relevant to attention. There are similar accounts in other Indic traditions.
Yes.
And we were talking about the idea that you could have not to try to do the whole brain or the whole mind at once, or all the features of consciousness, but just look at some special feature like attention, for example, look at the different traditions, see how they compare, see what they overlap, what they differ on, and then bring in a cognitive scientist or a few cognitive scientists and have them enter into this discussion and try to develop a vocabulary, let's say, just about attention that compares all of the different traditions and also some features of cognitive science. It seemed that that could then lead to also an empirical research program.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, and to integrate empirical research into both the dialogue between these traditions, so that empirical science is not just a dialogue partner with the traditions, but actually as a tool for the traditions themselves to talk to each other.
그렇죠.
Real kind of the empirical science, the dialogue is a jibu mayimba. Empirical science tone, ya jebes cost mental niguza, taya to the susu tone, pen a yelcheba, the same jung namsha delia. There's suna madam budriona, and the pensiungi, the Devakario mayo, the tujo, the ticket to dial pendo was down.
I think there's one another aspect that this collaboration can help. Science takes complex phenomena and then try to reduce it into different elements, more simple, more easily to identify, that can then be studied. And that also comes with the notion of vocabulary. We say anger, or we say compassion. There are so many kinds of anger, so many nuances to compassion. So both in the Buddhist vocabulary, which is very rich about mental life and mental event, and the science also would need to have corresponding ways of investigating those. So if you're studying anger, are you studying indignation in the face of a massacre, or you are studying hate? These are totally different mental states. So I think here, even in the process of spiritual practice, when we say we try to cultivate loving kindness of compassion, actually it's a very rich phenomena. We are, say for instance, visualizing the unbelievable suffering of sentient beings. We realize that just as we want to be happy and not to suffer, they want the same, and we recognize that. So we get concerned by their suffering or their happiness as I'm concerned with mine. So we then acknowledge the interdependency. And then we make the strong aspiration, may that suffering be dispelled, and not only that, but the causes of suffering, which is the ultimate ignorance, so there's a cognitive aspect. And then we try to cultivate that, not just a feeble feeling, but a very powerful, all-pervading mental state. So in that, there is a whole constellation of mental states. So we face that actually in our collaboration, compassion. And then, like our friend Paul Ekman also asked me, what, do you need to feel the suffering of others? Do you be emotionally sort of in tears, and when you think or not? Can you be sort of watching with just a cognitive aspect? So sometimes when we do cultivate compassion, we do all those together. So then we got slowly the idea that how could we precisely go into those different aspects, and would they have different brain signatures? So we have been specially attempting to do that with compassion, for instance. We ask the meditators to do just loving kindness toward a child, toward a dear person. Then how does it if you extend it to all sentient beings? And then compassion with the person who is suffering. So we know already that we spoke about empathy, that is not very clearly yet equivalent in Tibetan, but basically is the faculty to resonate with others' suffering. If someone is joyful and happy, you feel also joyful. If someone is very sad, you feel sad. So if someone suffers, the brain, in your brain there is some area that has to do with suffering. But then, is it only that, compassion? Well, some of the study that we have done, where we ask very artificially the meditator to separate that, which we don't do. Just please try to only resonate with the suffering again and again and again. Only that. Then it becomes really some kind of unbearable. That means if it's isolated of the all other aspect, the cognitive aspect, the strong aspiration and loving kindness, then it becomes sort of dysfunctional. Just feeling the other suffering, you sort of burnout, and this is a well-known phenomenon in people who take care of others. So then it is possible to, with the collaboration with science, to study isolated these elements, and therefore you can better reconstruct the whole process of what the whole experience of compassion is, including all those minute phenomena. And also Buddhist taxonomy has been making many efforts to distinguish those, and there's a possibility with meditators who can identify and generate in a way those things separately, which is not the way we normally do, may help to precisely find the equivalence and then have experiments that are related to all these aspects one by one, and that what is the integrated phenomena of compassion. So there, the collaboration becomes so much interactive, because you're not going to say, I'm just engaged in compassion. You say, I'm just going to do empathy for a while. Then I'm going to try to bring my best, the whole pervading compassion. Then I'm going to extend from a dear person with some maybe attachment to a neutral person, to a difficult person. And all that will take different aspects. And the scientists should be able also to relate that with what they find.
Wolf, yes.
It just occurred to me another aspect, because we are not alone in the world and we are not sitting in caves, all of us, but we are embedded in a very, very rich culture, both in the, all around the world. Now, I would like to have your opinion, whether the emotions and enlightened feelings that one gets in a higher meditative state could be at all comparable with what we find written in the literature, what people experience when they either read a very, very well-done poem, or when they listen to a piece of music, or when they look at a painting, where all those things are also captured. And I think everybody of us knows that there are moments of being taken where you forget about your little ego and you become very, very touched emotionally. So the question is, are those emotions different from those that one can get that are self-generated in meditation? Or is meditation just another way to get there? Or is it really so that experts are much more competent in having emotions and these deep feelings, which are also sometimes very positive? I mean, the empathy that one can feel in a piece of music, it's hard to describe. I would say exactly the same as an enlightened expert. I cannot find any words for what I just experienced hearing this second movement of Schubert's quintet. So what is your feeling about these relations?
Indian aesthetic theory, the sun, the highest form of experience.
Solness was saying that between these two, the meditatively generated heightened state on the one side.
So basically, there are two different kind of deep satisfaction or joyfulness.
Right.
One relying on sensorial sort of
Input.
input, right?
Right.
One not relying on sensorial, but through training of mind. So maybe the previous one, with satisfaction or joyfulness, relying on sensorial, because of the
Stimulus, input.
I think shorter.
Shorter period.
So long this facility there, and immediate after you get
That experience.
very strong sort of feeling. then, although later reminds or remember the tunji now there shache.
So you can kind of later remind that experience yourself.
Not
you can
feel it.
Not the feel. Yeah.
Oh. So that's, I think, so another sort of joyfulness experience through mental training may be longer period.
Longer lasting.
Lasting. Here, I think I mentioned before also, a sense of sense of caring or sense of concern of others' well-being towards one's own close friend. That actually, much involved attachment. And then towards enemy. One side, you have certain reason to oppose, but at the same time, they also have the fundamental right to overcome suffering, because they also same sentient being. Among human beings, as same human being, they also have the right to overcome suffering. So, on that basis, you develop sort of genuine sense of concern of their well-being. The previous one, very much mixed with attachment. Later one, no attachment. So, I wonder what differences at the brain
level. At the brain level.
In future, one practitioner, let him or let her meditate compassion towards friend, one towards enemy. Then, because of the example.
Then examine.
The later one is the real sort of compassion, unbiased. The previous one, biased. So, biased one often goes hatred and love, hatred go together. The later one, no. Very sort of stable.
Stable.
Your Holiness, I just wanted to ask in relation to Wolf's question, the meditator is engaging in a practice which is embedded within an ethical framework and typically would take certain vows or has certain aspirations. And I wonder, as a neuroscientist, to what extent embedding the practice within that kind of framework actually changes the brain in particular ways. And I think that one of the tasks for neuroscience is to develop a neuroscience of vows and aspirations, to see how making that kind of intentional commitment will affect the brain and change the brain's response to these kinds of practices.
Neuroscience the secularized that's how we do. So what was the specific question?
So it's just a comment on the difference between an experience of music or a painting, which is a spontaneous experience that doesn't arise within an ethical framework, and another kind of attentional absorption which may occur in meditation, but it is in the context of an ethical framework.
Cultivate.
That's a Europe. 다른 게 되게 안 되지. 센소리를 공회시에 다는 직대 영대세 패지디 랑도비스 패지비 정말 correspondency.
That may be true because in the first case, the experience is being mediated through the sensory input.
다르디 빈 둔두조 야 이렇게 들어가시 달리 차지 가지도 와. 그래서 야지 밀려다 남주 전에 다들 로봇이 냠부를 지금 로봇에 동에도 지르지서 든든되게 야지 그 땡션이 야 무치라고 지금 학벌도 차주고
Right.
주늘도 봐주고.
So, in the case of human experience of beautiful music, often the experience of that beauty can be enriched by certain knowledge of who the composer is and certain history that goes with it, that enriches the experience of that music. But on the other hand, we do also observe sometimes animals who seem to be totally absorbed to a beautiful music. So in their case, since they wouldn't have the historical background knowledge, so His Holiness is wondering what would be the difference.
Really, we don't know what is their sort of attraction. Now sometimes my dog, some noise like the computer or something, some pew like that dog. So looks to see he or she enjoy seems. 직도가 안 돼, 직도가. 근데 지금 너무 냠배양 다 그래서 장단 냠배께서 얘는 맨날 딱 그것도 소화 가지고 드시면 돼.
His Holiness is curious whether they actually can appreciate certain melody and have a sort of a joyful experience, or is it simply just a reaction to the sound?
I think some, of course, trained, some horses with music, they can also play. I think they enjoy.
Darwin was convinced of that.
And Darwin ki 다른 이제 지거래서 to music 가보야지.
하지. 제가 다윈 지나치기다.
So I'm going to be Darwin's follower, His Holiness is saying.
So, Your Holiness, I'm getting signals that our time with you for this afternoon session is coming to an end, but it's a very big day for Richie, because today the Dalai Lama designated him as a science guru. So congratulations.
Science guru.
And our discussion...
So usually it's a Tibetan tradition. Gurus really, I think, formed, this is some kind of different head. So I think you need.
And of course, our question and answer session will resume after His Holiness has left.
Thank you very much.